Once there was a forest, and on the edge of the forest there grew a beautiful rose tree. She made the most glorious blossoms, rose blossoms, each more exquisite than the last. And one day she made a rose bud that was so perfect and large and heavy that she had to bow down towards the ground with the weight of this bud. And when it finally opened, inside, curled up on the fragrant petals, was a child, a human child. The rose had given birth to a boy. Now the queen of that country was walking on the edge of the forest one day when she heard the crying of a baby, and she found the rose tree, and she found the rose bud, and there inside, curled up, a boy, a rose boy. And so she bent down and she picked him up and she wrapped him in her purple veil and she carried him back to the palace. And when the king came home from the war a few weeks later, he found the queen in her rose garden, and she was singing and she was pushing gently a cradle made of wicker, tied with silken ribbons. And he came and looked inside, and there was a baby boy. And he smiled and she smiled, and they accepted this child as their own, to be brought up in the palace as a prince. Now there had been once many children in that palace, all boys, 7 in fact, but each one had grown up and joined their father in the Great War, and all 7 had been slaughtered. And since then they were childless. This war, nobody could even remember how it originally began. It had been happening and continuing for so long that now the king rode out to battle just to avenge the blood of his sons. And this little prince was brought up to fight with a sword and to ride a horse by the king, and was told from childhood that it was his duty also to go into battle. The queen, meanwhile, taught the prince music and poetry. And the place that he was truly happiest was either in the rose garden or in the forest. So this young man grew up strong and good, and there came the night that he was in the royal chapel alone, watching over his armour, because the next day he would be knighted by his father and go into battle. And as he prayed quietly in that chapel, in the candlelight, his mother came in. And it was then that she told him where and how he had been born, and that his mother was a rose. When the dawn came up and lit up the armour with that pink gold early morning light, he put it on. His father knighted him, and together they rode off to the battle. On that terrible day, he saw the horror of war. He saw blood spilt everywhere. He heard terrible screams. And he even saw his own father knocked from his horse with a lance, and then the soldier with the lance killed his father. And straight away, when he saw that, the Rose Prince, in his mind, his brain was on fire with rage, and he set off behind that soldier to avenge his father's death. He burned to kill that soldier. And the soldier rode as fast as he could to the edge of the forest, and that was when the prince caught up with him, and the first blow with his sword knocked the lance from his hand. He fell onto the ground, and he cut that soldier's hand holding the lance clean off. And he was about to strike again when his eyes lifted and saw that there was a rose bush, a wild rose, growing there on the edge of the forest, and it was splattered with that man's blood. And in that moment, something happened in him. Something happened in his heart, in his soul, in his mind, where he did not want to kill anymore. And he told that man on the ground before him, he said, "Get up and flee while I am in my right mind." And the soldier disappeared as fast as he could. And then the Rose Prince rode back to the battlefield, and he gathered up the fallen standards, the flags of all the different armies. He gathered them all up and he held them high, and he shouted, "Stop! Stop fighting! Stop now! I declare this battle finished. Take off your armor, leave your weapons, and go home." And one by one, all the people on the battlefield heard his words in their own hearts, and they came to sanity, and they took off their armor, and they laid down their weapons, and they turned to go home. And then the Rose Prince went back to the forest and shouted out, "Where is my mother? Where is my mother who gave birth to me? Is it this rose bush here?" And then a nightingale flew down to him and said, "It is not her. Your mother has died." And the prince said, "I do not wish to be part of this human world anymore. I want peace. I want to live in deep peace. Can you help me?" The nightingale said, "If this is what you wish, I can help you. I will sing your soul back to peace." And as it grew dark, the nightingale began to sing. And the prince, his feet began to sink into the earth. And through the night, she sang and she sang and she sang. And the prince slowly, slowly gave himself up to the earth. And when dawn came, where the prince had stood, there grew a beautiful rose tree, just like his mother. he became a rose tree. And from then on, the rose tree produced beauty and fragrance. And they say that as long as the rose tree lived, there was peace in the land.